The lights flicker once, twice, and then surrender to an absolute darkness that spreads across continents like a wave of silence. In cities around the world, the familiar hum of electricity, that constant, unnoticed companion to modern existence, falls silent for the first time in living memory. Screens go black, refrigerators cease their quiet breathing, and the invisible web of signals that connects 8 billion souls dissolves into nothing. There is a moment, perhaps lasting only seconds, when the world holds its breath, waiting for the power to return. It does not return. The silence that follows is unlike anything the modern world has ever experienced. Without the background noise of machines, ventilation systems, and electronic devices, human ears strain against a void they were never designed to inhabit. Traffic lights hang dark and useless above intersections that descend into chaos within minutes. Hospitals switch to backup generators, their limited fuel supplies suddenly transformed from precaution into countdown. The night sky, usually washed pale by the glow of civilization, begins to reveal stars that most people alive have never truly seen. In those first hours, denial serves as a collective shield against the unthinkable. Surely the power will return by morning, people tell themselves as they fumble for candles and flashlights. Surely the authorities have a plan, a backup system, a way to restore the invisible current that sustains everything. But morning comes, and then another, and the infrastructure that once seemed permanent begins to reveal its terrifying fragility. The modern world, it becomes clear, was never built to survive its own absence. The collapse begins not with violence but with silence, the silence of pumps that no longer push water through pipes, of furnaces that no longer warm homes, of systems that no longer communicate with one another. Municipal water treatment requires electricity to filter, purify, and pressurize the flow to millions of taps. Within 3 days, most cities face a choice between drinking contaminated water or dying of thirst. The invisible architecture of survival, so carefully constructed over generations, begins to crumble from its foundation upward. Food systems designed for efficiency rather than resilience become tombs for the perishable abundance of modern agriculture. Refrigerated warehouses warm slowly, their contents rotting as trucks without fuel sit motionless in distribution centers. Supermarkets, stocked with perhaps 3 days of inventory under normal conditions, empty within hours as panic transforms neighbors into competitors. The just-in-time supply chain, celebrated for decades as a triumph of optimization, reveals itself as a fatal vulnerability when time itself becomes the enemy. Medical systems face impossible calculations as supplies dwindle and equipment fails. Insulin requires refrigeration, dialysis requires electricity, and ventilators require power that no longer exists. Pharmacies become scenes of desperation as patients dependent on daily medications confront the reality that modern medicine depends entirely on modern infrastructure. The diseases that humanity believed it had conquered begin to stir in the shadows of a world that can no longer manufacture antibiotics or maintain sterile surgical environments. Death, so long held at arm's length by technology, moves closer with each passing hour. Yet in the midst of this catastrophe lies a profound and unsettling truth that the modern mind struggles to accept. Homo sapiens, as a species, has walked this earth for approximately 300,000 years. For more than 299,000 of those years, not a single human being ever flipped a switch, charged a device, or relied on any power source beyond fire, sunlight, and the strength of their own bodies. The electrical grid that now fails so catastrophically has existed for barely a century and a half, a single heartbeat in the long life of humanity. The earliest humans faced challenges that would paralyze modern civilization, yet they not only survived but spread across every continent and climate zone on Earth. They crossed deserts without GPS, navigated oceans without engines, and endured ice ages without heating systems. Their success was not despite the absence of technology, but through the development of something far more fundamental: adaptive intelligence and collective resilience. The archaeological record stands as testimony to their extraordinary competence in a world that offered no safety nets and no second chances. What modern humans experience as catastrophe, their ancestors experienced as ordinary life. The darkness that descends when power fails was simply the natural condition of every night for hundreds of thousands of years. The silence that terrifies the modern ear was the acoustic environment in which human consciousness evolved and flourished. This perspective does not diminish the genuine suffering of a technological collapse, but rather illuminates how deeply humanity has forgotten what it once knew. The crisis is not merely infrastructural, but cognitive, a species that has lost touch with the skills that defined its identity. Fire was the first and greatest technology, and for most of human history, it was the only technology that mattered. Around its warmth, early humans gathered to share food, tell stories, and coordinate the activities of the following day. The mastery of flame provided light, heat, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food, unlocking calories that fueled the expansion of the human brain. Archaeological sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia reveal hearths that burned continuously for generations, tended by communities that understood fire not as a convenience but as a sacred trust. The rhythm of daily life followed the sun with an intimacy that modern humans can barely imagine. Dawn was not an inconvenience to be blocked with blackout curtains, but the signal for activity, hunting, gathering, and the work of survival. Midday heat prompted rest in the shade, conserving energy for the cooler hours of afternoon. Dusk initiated the transition to the firelit world of evening, when stories were told, tools were crafted, and the bonds of community were reinforced through shared presence. This solar synchronization was not primitive but profoundly efficient, aligning human energy expenditure with the natural availability of light and temperature. Knowledge transmission occurred without writing, without recording devices, without any permanent medium except the living memory of the community. Elders carried decades of accumulated wisdom about plant identification, animal behavior, seasonal patterns, and territorial geography. Songs, stories, and rituals encoded practical information in forms that could survive the death of any individual knowledge per. Archaeological evidence suggests that this oral tradition was remarkably accurate, preserving descriptions of geological events, coastline changes, and climate shifts across thousands of years. The human brain, it turns out, was the original hard drive, and it required no electricity to function. When darkness fell, early humans did not panic, but rather transitioned into a different mode of existence, shaped by millions of years of evolutionary adaptation. Their eyes, far more sensitive than those of modern humans overexposed to artificial light, gathered whatever illumination the moon and stars provided. Sleep patterns likely differed from the consolidated 8-hour block that modernity considers normal, with evidence suggesting a segmented approach: sleeping, waking for a quiet hour of activity, then sleeping again until dawn. The night was not an enemy to be conquered with floodlights, but a natural phase of existence with its own rhythms and purposes. Darkness was also the domain of sound, and early humans developed an auditory awareness that modern ears have largely lost. The crack of a twig, the rustle of grass, the distant call of a predator, these sounds carried information essential to survival. Archaeological evidence of sleeping arrangements suggests strategic positioning, with vulnerable individuals protected at the center of groups and alert guardians stationed at the periphery. Fear existed, certainly, but it was a calibrated fear, managed through experience, knowledge, and the security of collective vigilance. The night was not terrifying because they understood it. It is terrifying to modern humans because they do not. The psychological resilience of early humans in the face of darkness reveals something profound about the architecture of the human mind. Anxiety in the modern world often stems from isolation, uncertainty, and the overwhelming complexity of systems beyond individual comprehension. Early humans faced genuine physical danger but enjoyed the psychological security of total transparency. They understood their world completely, knew the faces of everyone who mattered, and possessed the skills necessary to meet their own needs. The darkness of a powerless world would devastate modern psyches not because of the darkness itself, but because of the helplessness it would expose. Ancient humans were never helpless. Survival in the deep past was never an individual achievement, but always a collective accomplishment woven from countless threads of interdependence. No single person could master every skill necessary for long-term survival. So communities developed specialists, expert flint knappers, skilled trackers, knowledgeable herbalists, Patient teachers of the young, the weak, the elderly, and the injured were not abandoned but carried, fed, and protected by those with strength to spare. Archaeological evidence of healed bones shows that individuals who suffered devastating injuries were cared for through long recovery periods, contributing nothing yet receiving everything. This was not charity but strategy, the recognition that today's burden might be tomorrow's essential ally. The sharing of skills created redundancy that no technological system has ever matched. If one expert died, others had learned enough to continue the essential work. If one hunting ground failed, collective memory held the locations of alternatives tried generations before. Knowledge was distributed across the community like a living network, with no single point of failure capable of collapsing the whole. Modern civilization concentrates expertise in specialists who cannot be replaced, and centralizes critical systems in facilities that cannot be duplicated. The ancient approach was slower, less efficient, but ultimately far more robust against catastrophe. An early human transported to a world without power would experience not catastrophe but recognition. The absence of artificial light would be simply night as they had always known it. The need to find clean water would engage skills practiced since childhood. The challenge of obtaining food without refrigeration or grocery stores would be a problem with solutions as familiar as their own hands. Fire making, shelter construction, plant identification, animal tracking, these would not be desperate improvisations, but the ordinary competencies of any functional adult. The powerless world would be, for them, simply the world. Modern humans would face a more terrifying journey, not merely learning new skills, but unlearning the helplessness that technological dependence has cultivated over generations. The knowledge exists, scattered in books that few have read, and in the minds of specialists who have never tested their theories against necessity. Experimental archaeologists have demonstrated that ancient technologies work, that stone tools can be effective, that wild foods can sustain life, that survival is possible without any product of industrial civilization. But demonstration is not competence, and competence is not instinct. The gap between knowing that something can be done and being able to do it under pressure could prove fatal for millions. Survival reconstructions and primitive skills communities offer a glimpse of what relearning might look like. Participants who spend weeks or months living with Stone Age technology report a profound shift in awareness, a heightened attention to environmental details that modern life trains humans to ignore. Time moves differently when measured by sun angles rather than digital displays. Relationships deepen when shared labor replaces shared entertainment. The body remembers movements and postures that chairs and cars have suppressed for generations. These experiments suggest that the ancient competencies are not entirely lost, but merely dormant, waiting to be awakened by necessity. The transition would be measured in suffering, with the most vulnerable paying the highest price for society's collective amnesia. Those who have never known hunger would learn it with brutal speed. Those who have never spent a night without climate control would discover what their ancestors knew about cold, heat, and endurance. The illusion of individual self-sufficiency, so carefully cultivated by consumer culture, would shatter against the reality of absolute interdependence. Communities that rebuilt the ancient patterns of mutual reliance might survive and eventually thrive. Those that descended into competition for dwindling resources would accelerate their own destruction. Electricity did not create human survival. It merely replaced the skills, relationships, and knowledge systems that had sustained humanity since its beginning. The flip of a switch substituted for the mastery of fire. The delivery truck replaced the hunting party. The smartphone displaced the elder's memory. These substitutions brought extraordinary benefits: comfort, efficiency, the liberation of human potential for art, science, and leisure. But they also severed the connection between humanity and the competencies that made it human. If the power never returns, the question will not be whether survival is possible, but whether modern humans still possess the capacity to remember what they have forgotten.